Welcome, Yamhill County, to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, Howie Harkema, and our tagline is, "And how we doing?" Today I have two guests with me, and they're both from the Yamhill County National Alliance on Mental Health, Mental Illness. We have David Beck. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
And we have Jan Urton. Jan, nice to have you with us. So, what is mental illness and what is considered mental illness, David?
Mental illness is a brain disorder, very much like other sorts of disorders that afflict human beings, such as cancer or diabetes. A derangement of some activities of our brain that manifests itself in behavioral and other sorts of illness, things that cause us to alter our behavior, alter the way we see ourselves, and alter the way we react to the world around us.
And it is considered a disease.
It is considered a disease. It's very much an organic disease. Many people think that the brain is something magic and doesn't have any kind of a physical reality, the mind, that is.
Right.
But in fact, it is very much a physical disease. It's some derangement of the way the neurons connect with each other, with the production of neurotransmitters, with the way the parts of the brain interact with other parts of the body and hormones in the body as well.
And it's chemically made up as well.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Jan, you'd like to add anything to that?
No, just the point that the difference between mental illness and perhaps other illnesses is not that it's not an illness or not connected with the body, but because it is our brain, it impacts how we think. And how we think also affects what we say and our behavior. So when there is a disorder, our thinking and or our ways of reacting to things are affected by that. So it's sometimes misunderstood that someone is saying or doing what they are, not because they chose to, but because that's how their pathways have developed and that's how they think and how they respond to things.
So sometimes their judgment is impaired. They may not have filters to be able to disseminate what to say or how to say it or how to act.
Right, exactly.
That's a very important point. Those who are afflicted by mental illness are not doing what they want to do. They're doing something that they can't control.
Exactly.
Right.
So, would you talk about stigma and how this plays into those who do have a mental illness?
Dan?
Well, stigma is basically a negative view of how people are acting or being, and a negative view that mental illness is somehow more something someone has chosen or something that someone does have more control over. And so there's an ignorance about what is going on, and because of that, then we attribute negative things to the words and the diagnoses, and that then inhibits people from identifying themselves as having a mental illness. Who wants to be, oh yeah, that crazy person that says weird things? So even people who have not as significant mental illnesses may not identify or want to identify because they don't want to be that crazy person.
And a key thing about stigma is that it inhibits a free discussion, an open discussion about what the illness means and how it affects us. And so someone who feels that stigma and the mentally ill themselves often feel it most acutely, really have a very difficult time of helping people around them understand what they're dealing with and what their illness is like.
It's got to be terrorizing to have this inability to deal with the realities that we live and not be able to discuss and bring to words what that feels like.
It is, but you know what's really exciting about this time that we're living in right now is that many people who have mental illnesses are public people, public figures, have chosen to say, so to speak, come out and talk about it. And we'll come back to this later on.
Yes.
But this is a chance to allow us to perhaps fight stigma in a very public way.
That's awesome. So what is the impact of mental illness on our society?
Well, let me start with that one.
Go ahead.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. A couple of things are worth talking about. First of all, it's very common. Mental illness is far more common than most people realize. 1 in 17 people live with a persistent mental illness. 1 in 4 people on an annual basis experience some kind of an episode of mental illness. And so the very real likelihood is that not only do we know someone, but someone in this building has a mental illness.
Sure.
And so we have to be constantly aware that this is something that's not a unique, hidden, because it's often hidden. It's not a unique thing that just doesn't exist.
So here's a question that a lot of people probably ask you. Aren't pharmaceuticals the answer?
Pharmaceuticals, medications certainly have helped in many ways, and we've learned and we found new medications and newer things that have been more helpful with less side effects than in the past. But even medications, when working well for a person, do not necessarily treat all of the symptoms. And medications also have side effects.
Sure.
And so sometimes taking a medication for mental illness produces some side effects, which then create other problems, medical, physical. And then sometimes people start taking medications for the side effects, and people can end up on huge numbers of medications.
So it snowballs.
Right.
And medications, a pharmaceutical approach by itself is one of the many, I shouldn't say many, unfortunately there aren't enough, but one of the ways of treating mental illness. There are a variety of other kinds of things in addition to pharmaceuticals that are very effective. And for some people, pharmaceuticals are more effective, and other people, talk therapy or other kinds of things are more effective. And so finding what works for any given person is almost a constant battle, and then getting the pharmaceutical regimen balanced, as Jan said, is something that's a continual battle, I guess is probably a good way of putting it. And in fact, once it's set, it may change next
Right.
year or next month, depending on your evolution, your personal nature of your own brain illness.
Right.
I've known people who have gone off their medications because they couldn't afford them anymore.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, well.
Yes, that's another piece of medication, is if you can't afford them, if you don't have insurance or other ways of paying for medications, then going off medications mean that symptoms come back or get more severe.
Exactly.
And that's one thing about mental illness, is even if you have a severe and persistent mental illness, you still may not be operating out of the sense of reality or having those symptoms constantly.
Right.
So people can be operating pretty regularly, normally, and then have symptoms.
Sure.
So without medications, these serious and persistent mental illnesses get worse.
So this is for both of you. What is Yamhill County NAMI, please?
Well, Jan's a treasurer, and so I'm going to let her start.
Okay, well, Yamhill County NAMI is an organization of people who have concerns about mental illness. Generally, there are family members and friends of those who have mental illness, as well as people who have mental illness themselves. And so the main goals of our organization are support, advocacy, and education. So in Yamhill County, we have regular monthly meetings in McMinnville where members can participate, and those meetings include usually some sort of education piece, as well as talking about areas that need advocacy, and then support for those who suffer from mental illness, as well as those who are loved ones and family members. And so we do a lot of activities, including, besides the monthly meetings, support groups, and we give out information at various fairs and booths and places around the county. We participate on committees. We do advocacy with our legislators, both locally and statewide and nationally. So.
We'll get into this probably more later on about what accomplishments NAMI Yamhill County has achieved, but it has proven to be, first of all, one of the first affiliates of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in the state of Oregon, predating the actual Oregon Alliance on National Alliance on mental illness, and we're very proud to say it's been one of the most active ones. Goes back to the 80s, early 80s, I think, something like that.
That's fantastic.
So we're really proud of the history of work on behalf of the mentally ill.
Well, it sounds like you're ahead of the curve as far as county representation for those who are in need.
I think so.
Yeah, we're one of the smaller affiliates because we're a smaller county, and yet we are one of the more active affiliates, and especially for the size that we are.
Well, it never surprises me about Yamhill County or McMinnville at all, ever.
Well said.
So what is the major obstacle in getting our society involved in bringing about a greater awareness regarding mental illness in this country?
Well, I think Jan hit the nail on the head a few moments ago when she started talking about stigma. That's the major thing, I think, really, is to bring it out into the open, help people understand what their loved ones are going through, what their neighbors are going through, help the government understand how care for the mentally ill is not something that is, which is all too often happens, not something that should be overlooked in medical programs,
Sure.
in Medicaid funding and so forth, where many people, especially often, or I shouldn't say especially, but oftentimes the mentally ill are struggling with their whatever the demons are that may cause them to be unable to hold a job, to have insurance, and have some of the kind of bells and whistles that folks who are not struggling with these kind of things have to deal with. So it's a battle of awareness and a battle of treatment.
Sure.
And support.
And they can fall into a realm of really serious problems: homelessness, grief, suicide, etc., etc. But your group, your NAMI group here in Yamhill County, has meetings for not only those who are mentally ill, but the families who are dealing with this disease.
Yes, and Jan needs to talk about those things, but I think it's important to put a framework around that question. The role of NAMI Yamhill County is to provide support for families.
Yes.
Provide advocacy for, as we just were saying, for care, and to provide for an environment in which people with mental illness can thrive. And toward that end, NAMI Yamhill County has a number of programs, and I think that's what Jan's cue is to.
Well, I was just going to say that NAMI started with some primarily parents, but other loved ones, family members who had someone with mental illness.
Sure.
And they knew their loved one wasn't getting the treatment, the support, the help that was needed, and they didn't really even know always what to do. And so it really was started by some parents and family members saying, supporting each other, and then also saying, we've got to do something, we've got to let people know, because education is the other big piece of NAMI.
Huge piece.
Yes. And in regard to the impact, I think if we think about many of the major problems that we talk about in this country, poverty, homelessness, prisons,
Substance
abuse, all of those are connected many times with mental illness.
Sure.
A large percentage of people with those kind of problems have mental illness.
So May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Would you like to talk about that?
It is.
Yes.
And there's the
It
graphic.
is, and we take,
Right.
and that's a very good slide to show. The word cloud on the left-hand side really brings home all of the key components of
Yes.
mental illness. And as I said earlier, 1 in 4 people suffer from some form of mental illness. And let me put that in another context
Yeah.
for you. In Yamhill County, where there are about 100,000 citizens living,
Right.
given the statistics on the prevalence of mental illness, that means about 6,000 people in this county struggle with mental illness on a severe and persistent basis throughout their lives, and that's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
The demand for the services of an organization, for the things that an organization like NAMI Yamhill County provide, is extremely important to those people.
Andrew, would you please bring up the Yoda graphic next, please? So it is true that there's 6,000 people that suffer from this disease in Yamhill County, and that is a microcosm of what is the greater U.S. If there's 6,000 people here dealing with that illness, if you would bring up slide number 2 next, please.
Yes, there we go. That tells the story as plainly and cleanly as you could possibly want it to be.
And I would say that this is with a severe and persistent mental illness, because
Right.
mental illness encompasses a range of illnesses, some of which are severe and persistent, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. But there are also people who have anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, other illnesses that are not as severe and persistent or ongoing all the time.
Right.
And so they may be your friends and neighbors that you see all the time and wouldn't guess that they are even dealing with mental illness. So that's a larger number when you include the not severe and persistent ongoing mental illness.
Exactly. Andrew, if you would bring back up slide number 1, the very first slide again. And David, would you please read that?
Yes, that's definitely worth talking about again in the context of Jan's last comment. Most people think about mental illness as bipolar depression and manic depression,
right.
Schizophrenia, but those are just some of the more common ones. But not by any means the limit of the whole spectrum. Obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress syndrome, a variety of panic and anxiety disorders that are perhaps not quite as debilitating, and I don't mean to minimize them, but are maybe more controllable with pharmaceuticals. But then there are some really severe kinds of things, borderline personality disorders, antisocial personality disorders, and so forth. And then, of course, including other compulsive disorders that you mentioned earlier, such as things like gambling and so forth. And all of these involve, many of these, I shouldn't say all of them, I don't know that for a fact, I'm not a psychiatrist, but many of these involve a certain amount of self-medication.
Yes.
And whether it's alcohol or drugs, that's part of the thing we talked about earlier of a dual diagnosis, or a duality in how mental illness expresses itself.
Very good. So is NAMI a nonprofit organization?
Yes, it is. Yes, we are a nonprofit. And in fact, in connection with Mental Health Month, that is the month when we do our fundraising.
Yes.
Because our funds come from donations. And the primary fundraiser that we do is the annual NAMI Walk.
Yes.
And in fact, it was last weekend in Portland. We walked along
the Esplanade. Yes.
Esplanade, exactly. It was a beautiful day. And I understand we had over 6,000 people in that walk. And I was there with
Wow.
my family, and you guys were there.
As we were as well.
And many other people. And the purpose of the walk is to fundraise, but also, again, to reduce stigma. We're out there, people with dogs and kids, and walking, and there was music.
Signs, and everyone in Portland can see
Right,
what
and
we're doing
signs
there.
saying, hey. So it's another way to help people be aware. Yeah, it's something that affects lots of us, and it's
And
not.
Howie, there's another very important
Yeah.
corollary of the not-for-profit nature of NAMI in general and NAMI Yamhill County in particular, and that is that all of the work that we talk about, the various groups that Jan was talking about, the family support groups and so forth, these are all run by volunteers. We have no paid staff,
Right.
and they're all free. So there are no charges for people to participate. There are no costs for being a part of one of these support groups or these education groups.
So above and beyond the walk, locally you are funded through dues and sometimes memorials. Would you like to talk about that, Jan?
Yeah, we do have monthly dues, or yearly dues, and those are apportioned to locally as well as statewide and nationally. But then we accept donations, and so sometimes people give just because they go, oh, that's a good cause.
Right.
But also people who have lost loved ones, and especially, unfortunately, when there's a suicide, families are grieving. They may have memorials and take donations, and so we have received donations in memory of a loved one who suffered from a mental illness. And we have a fund, actually a suicide prevention fund, that was funded originally from a memorial.
I'm going to go back to question 10, and I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to have you talk about each of these. So under support, tell us about NAMI Connection, family support groups, family-to-family groups, peer-to-peer, and suicide bereavement support groups. And Andrew, if you'd bring up slides 4 and 5 as we're talking, please.
Okay. Well, yeah, family support is a major function of NAMI, and that's kind of how we started. And so we do have 4 family support groups that meet every month. 3 of those groups are held in McMinnville. They meet at Abacus House.
Yes.
And the first and third Thursdays of the month. And as well, there's another group that meets on the second Saturday of each month. And then in Newburgh, there is a support group that meets once a month on the first Saturday of the month. And those groups are primarily for families to come together, family members and loved ones, to support their family members and talk about the challenges and the joys and what's going well, what's not going well. And people who have mental illnesses are also welcome to come to those groups.
Yes.
But we do have some specific groups for those who have mental illness. We call those peer-to-peer groups.
Right.
And so that's, we have a peer group that meets at Deskin Commons in Newburgh.
Yes.
And that one was started fairly recently, and I don't have it right here in front of me.
Second
It's on the
and
next-
fourth Mondays of
Yeah,
of the
second and
of the
fourth
month,
Mondays.
yes.
So those are the support groups. Although then there's also a suicide bereavement support group. Yeah, there's the peer group meetings. And then a suicide bereavement group, which started fairly recently because unfortunately there have been a number of suicides in Yamhill County. And we felt there's really a need to support those who've lost a loved one through suicide.
Yes.
So we invited a group that has experience in that in the Portland area to come talk to us, and then out of that we started creating a group here in Yamhill County.
And there's one more thing on here, Howie, in that group of things that NAMI Yamhill County provides that I think is worth mentioning.
Okay.
And it's actually one of the, in its own way, a very effective thing, and that is where a program where we offer people, loved ones who have mental illness, to actually go out and talk to groups in the community, Kiwanis groups or
Rotary.
Rotary and so
Sure.
forth, about what it's like to live with mental illness, what it's like not to be able to get up in the morning not because you don't want to. Sometimes I don't want to, but
We all
to be
know.
unable to drag your
Right.
body out of bed and to
Exactly.
drag your body to a shower, to feed yourself because you are suffering from depression or whatever the illness is.
Right.
And these kind of interactions with the community are very eye-opening. We're fighting the stigma, but there's another kind of interaction and as a parallel that's also very useful. The first responders, the police,
Yes.
are oftentimes the first people to come
Arrive,
upon
sure.
someone in crisis, and they need to know as well what it's like to for someone to be living with a mental illness, and so we do a great deal of work bringing this this information to the police and others in the first
Fire,
responder.
EMTs and-
ambulance,
Exactly,
EMTs,
exactly.
yes.
And in fact, a corollary of that is something called crisis intervention training, CIT training, and we have been NAMI, Yamhill County has been, and other NAMIs as well, have been very vigorous about making sure the various police forces from the town level, the county level, and state level get training in how to deal with, and so that the first thing that they, the first thing that you do is not to club someone, but try to understand and deal with the mental illness.
Boy, that
crisis
makes so
they're
much
going through.
sense, David.
Yes.
Right.
We're running out of time. We've only got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you about your NAMI accomplishments here in Yamhill County. And Andrew, if you'd bring up that graphic, please.
This may be a little bit difficult to read on the screen, but I said at the very beginning that we are very proud of the activity, the level of energy that's behind the various volunteers that populate the NAMI family, whether it's these various support groups, the walk, raising money, all of the various things that we do. It's really an enviable list. Jan, I'm not sure if there are any that you would want to point out.
Well, I wanted to just mention one that we passed by when we were talking about groups, but the family-to-family class.
Yes.
That's a 12-week class for family and close loved ones of someone with mental illness, and it is an education piece where they learn many aspects of mental illness and treatment and recovery, and that's another thing that we hadn't discussed particularly, but recovery in the mental health world, what we're talking about is recovery from mental illness doesn't mean you don't have it anymore, you'll never have symptoms.
Right.
It means your symptoms are controlled well enough that you can operate and in your life in general ways and not have the mental illness being an obstacle.
Right.
And it often takes more than just medication or therapy, but a combination of things and other things that keep us healthy, because what keeps us healthy all over helps mental health also.
And I want to add for just a few seconds something to what Jan just said. Being able to operate and run your life and function is something that when we see people like Jane Pauley or some of the folks who are very active in fighting stigma, and even see the success of someone like some actors or composers or authors and so forth, and people will think, well, okay, yes, people will think that mental illness is something that can be conquered. Well, those people are special people. They are very high-functioning people.
Yes.
And for the most people with mental illness, they don't have that kind of luxury, that ability to
Well, these are
become-
very creative people
Yes.
yes.
and high functioning.
Sure, we all know Robin Williams and loved his performances, but he struggled with demons that we can't even begin to fathom along the way. And unfortunately, I have to say that those are the unusual people,
Right.
And we shouldn't take them as a model for anyone with mental illness can just, if they wanted to, just achieve that level.
I think it's more that we also now know that many of them had the struggles, just not in the limelight, and yet they were still able to accomplish
Yes.
these things.
Yeah.
If you would bring up the crisis hotline slide. David, thank you very much for being
Thank
here.
you so much, Hallie, for having us.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you,
I'm
yes.
sorry that we've run out of time. We've actually gone over just a touch, but that's okay. It's cable access. So if you'd bring down the slide, Andrew. Thank you so much, viewers, for watching. I hope that you've learned a lot from this. I'm sure that there are some takeaways from this conversation that you can carry forward. If you would like to get involved, look at the NAMI website, go to their Facebook page, et cetera, and get involved. Thank you both very much for this discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.